Morning and welcome to the House meeting. This morning, we are going to do a reminder walkthrough of H276 with our Legislative Council. Welcome back, Ellen.
Morning, Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So I'm here on H276, an act relating to the designation of state wildlands. I think I may have done a walkthrough of this last session.
Actually, what I want to remind folks is that we, first week of session took some testimony on this one from Zach Porter and John Davis. So, and we're hearing from other witnesses later this week on this bill.
So starting on page 1, section 1 is a short title. So this act may be cited as the Vermont Climate Resilience and State Wildlands Act. And section 2 are the findings. The General Assembly finds the planet is facing the consequences of climate change and the catastrophic loss of biodiversity, both globally and locally. Intact and connected ecosystems reduce flood risks, mitigate drought, sequester and store carbon, and support Vermont's biodiversity and clean water. On to page 2. Vermont's most effective and efficient contribution to conserving biological diversity and maintaining a landscape resilient to climate change is to conserve an intact and connected landscape. The Department of Fish and Wildlife, working within the Agency of Natural Resources and with Vermont conservation organizations, has developed Vermont Conservation Design, a framework to sustain the state's ecologically functional landscape into the future. Vermont Conservation Design finds that historically, the vast majority of Vermont's landscape was old forest, and it is the original habitat condition for many species. The state's native flora and fauna that have been here prior to European settlement are adapted to this landscape of old, structurally complex forest punctuated by natural disturbance gaps and occasional natural openings such as wetlands and outcrops. Complex physical structures of old forest creates diverse habitats, many of which are absent or much less abundant in younger forests. As a result of the persistent structural and vegetative complexity above ground and the diverse biome below ground and associated complex biotic and abiotic relationships that develop over time, old forests also protect water quality, sequester and store carbon, provide opportunities for adaptation of species, and community relationships to climate and other environmental changes. On to page 3. And set an ecological benchmark against which to measure active management of Vermont's forests. Although there are small patches of old forest scattered around the state, old forest is absent in Vermont as a functional component of the landscape. Allowing about 9% of Vermont's forest to become old forest will bring this missing component back to Vermont's landscape and offer confidence that species that benefit from or depend on this condition can persist. And in most forests, passive restoration will result in old forest conditions. Only approximately 4% of Vermont and 3% of New England are managed as ecological reserves, as defined in 10 VSA Chapter 89, to assist with restoration of old forests. State lands provide only 2% of Vermont's average annual Timbus harvest volume. 90% of state lands are located in forested headwater settings, which are particularly susceptible to generating runoff during storm events, given their topography and geologic setting. On to page 4. 2023 Acts and Resolves number 59 called for prioritizing ecological reserve areas to protect highest priority natural communities and maintain or restore old forests. To meet the goals of 2023 Acts and Resolves number 59, the state of Vermont requires a statutory landscape designation to facilitate the establishment of ecological reserves on state lands. So on page 4, section 3, this is where the statutory language starts. So section 3 creates 10 VSA Chapter 90, the chapter on state wildlands. Section 28.
Question.
Yep.
Speak to when we create new chapters.
If there aren't other existing statutes that are directly relevant or related to the topic, and there's going to be more than one section on the topic, Creating a new chapter is appropriate. It's a little bit more art than science. But in creating its own chapter, I didn't necessarily think it lined up easily with other things or chapters where it needed to use other specific definitions. Yeah. So the purpose section. The purpose of this chapter is to ensure, for the benefit of current and future generations of Vermonters, and for the entire community of life in the Green Mountain State, an enduring resource of publicly owned wildlands. Definitions. As used in this chapter, conversion has the same meaning as in section 2801 of this title. Core area means an administrative land management designation used by the Agency of Natural Resources in long-range management plans for state lands. Highest priority natural communities and habitat features means conservation targets critical for an ecologically functional landscape that are identified in ANR's Vermont Conservation Design. On to page 5. Land Management Classification 1.0, highly sensitive management, means an administrative land management designation used by the Agency of Natural Resources in long-range management plans for state lands. Land Management Classification 4.0, intensive management, means an administrative land management designation used by the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources in long-range management plans for state lands. I do think those are both technically the definition. For those land management classifications, they may need more detail. Because clearly those are two different types of management styles.
We're going to hear from the commissioner later this week.
Okay, I was looking for them. They're not mentioned in statute elsewhere, so you perhaps want to consider defining them a little bit more. On page 5, line 9, natural area has the same meaning as in section 2607 of this title. Subsection 7, skiable line means the path taken by a skier or rider as they ski through trees or around obstacles. And wildlands means a land management designation within the category of ecological reserves, as defined in 2802 of this title, of any size and current condition, permanently protected from conversion, and explicitly intended and managed to allow natural processes to prevail. 2812, designation of state wildlands. The following areas are designated as state wildlands, except as described in 2814, which is coming up after this. All state-managed natural areas and core areas. All areas designated as land management classification 1.0, highly sensitive management, as of January 1, 2025. Onto page 6. All highest priority natural communities and habitat features identified by Vermont Conservation Design on state lands. And then this list of specific forests and parks.
Yeah, you need to read them all.
Okay. On to page 7. So 2812 is saying these existing state-owned lands, as they're laid out here, are being designated as wildlands, which is a management style with minimal human intervention. On page 7, section 2813 goes into a little bit more detail about what that means. Management of state wildlands, notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, ANR shall manage state wildlands as follows. The area shall be permanently protected from conversion. ANR shall allow natural processes to prevail with minimal human interference. There shall be no vegetation management, including timber harvesting, pruning, cutting, herbicide application, salvage logging, or removal of diseased or infected trees. There shall be no alteration of surface waters, groundwater, or wetlands, including damming, draining, filling, diverting, or channelizing. Subsection B, this chapter shall not govern ANR's management of trail-based recreation, existing Class A and B roads as of January 1, 2025, designated according to the Department of Forest, Parks, and Rec policy number 13. Designated backcountry ski zones as of January 1, 2025, where vegetation may be managed to maintain existing skiable lines. On to page 8. Hunting, fishing, foraging, gathering of medicines, or practicing ceremony. And vegetation management in areas not listed in 2812 of this chapter or designated pursuant to section 2815 of this chapter, which is coming up. That's yeah. And so nothing in this chapter shall prevent the state from authorizing measures required to respond to emergencies involving the health and safety of persons. So this is setting up that there, on these wildlands, minimal vegetation management or human interference. But there are some exceptions, including recreation, some existing roads, backcountry ski, hunting, and then vegetation management in areas not specifically listed. On page 8, section 2814 sets out exclusions. The following areas are excluded from wildlands designation in 2812 of this chapter. Areas designated in a long-range management plan as of July 1, 2025 as land management classification 4.0 intensive management. Areas within a management unit for which a long-range management plan does not exist, or for which the long-range management plan predates A&R land management classification designations, but meets the definition of intent for land management classification 4.0 intensive management. And any areas where management as a wildland is legally precluded by deed or easement. And then finally on page 9, future designations of wildlands. Upon future acquisition of parcels that adjoin any area listed in section 2812 of this chapter, or that are separated by those areas only by road or right-of-way, the Agency of Natural Resources shall manage those areas as wildlands, unless after opportunity for public comment and public hearing, based on substantial evidence, the agency finds that doing so would not be consistent with the purpose of this chapter. So if A&R is coming into ownership of a parcel adjacent to a wildland, that area should also be added to the wildland designation unless there is substantial evidence that it would not be contributing to the purpose of this chapter. And there's a public comment and public hearing associated with that. Subsection B, upon acquisition of future parcels that do not adjoin any areas listed in 2812, or that are not separated from those areas by only a road or right-of-way, the Agency of Natural Resources shall inventory the qualities and characteristics of the acquired areas and shall manage these areas as wildlands if doing so would be consistent with the purpose of this chapter. So for other lands not directly adjacent, A&R should review them and determine if, taking into consideration Vermont conservation design and the other things mentioned at the beginning of this chapter, if these lands should be wildlands or not. And then finally, the state shall not refuse to purchase or accept donated areas with a conservation easement, including a forever wild easement, without just cause. And then, should you take this bill up, this would need to change the effective date for this.
Do members have questions? Representative Chapin.
Just that very last line, without just cause, can you just explain what a little more detail what that would mean, what the process would be for figuring out just.
There isn't anything specified here. I think if there's nothing spelled out. So if the agency would need to provide reasons if asked by someone why they were not seeking to accept a parcel. And I don't know what form that would take, how public these acquisitions actually are for this, so that people would have notice other than the current owner. So perhaps the current owner would be able to say, I'm offering to donate this parcel. Why are you not accepting it?
Representative Pritchard.
Thank you. So on page 8, line 11, the area or 9, the following lands are excluded from wildlands designations. Areas designated in a lawn management plan as of January 2025 with these classifications. So what happens is land management classification and intensive management not allowed after that time, and below where the Agency of Natural Resources land management classification designations, same as that. If it's past this date, does that mean that that plan can't, another management plan couldn't be put in place, or does that mean that that they're not excluded at all?
No.
Is that exclusion permanent?
Let me take a step back. So, all the areas listed, all these state forests and parks have long-range management plans that the agency develops for them. They are, I think, about 20-year plans, and they redo them on their regular cycle. And so at the when this bill is to go into effect, you can actually consider if January 1, 2025 is still the accurate date. This bill was introduced last year, so you may want to consider a different date. But as of this legislation being enacted, things that were designated as intensive management are excluded. As the last section talks about, when there's future acquisitions, the long-range management plan would be developed after new things are designated. And so I don't think it is saying that those land management classifications can't ever actually change or be updated, but that this is setting the parameter by which lands should or should not be designated as wildlands. And if something has intensive management applied to it currently, it is not a candidate for the wildlands designation. And I'm not super well versed in how ANR goes about making those designations. So you may want to hear more about that.
Okay, yeah, I think I would like to hear more.
Yeah, and the commissioner is going to come in on Friday. But I think I had a related question about the definition of the permanence of these places, permanently protected from conversion. So the intent is that areas are, so would this cover the list of the state lands that would currently be wildlands in their entirety, or the areas that were 4.0 would not be in?
Yes.
Okay. Only the areas that are 1.0?
I don't think it's only the area. So I don't know what the maps look like, but I think it's excluding specifically the 4.0 from those forests and parks, if there are any within them.
Yeah. Other questions? Representative. No.
On the definition of old forest, increasing it to 9%. In previous testimonies, I believe one of the goals for ANR was 7%. All of a sudden, it's moved to 9%. How did the percentage get arrived at?
I believe so that's what Vermont Conservation Design has, I believe, is that 9% is the goal. Yeah, so I don't think I heard your testimony about 7%. I don't
Anita,
remember that.
did you hear that?
It was in one of the readings from Forestry Group. Also on page 7, lines 6 through 11, they remove no vegetative management including, and that's an inclusive list of timber removal, pruning, cutting, herbicides, salvage logging, no removal of diseased or infected trees. And I guess one of my problems with that is no removal of infected trees. When you look at the emerald ash spora and you look at other species that are subject to infection, beech, nectaria, etc. I did not see anywhere in the bill or any other bill that advocated for fire control. For instance, the state used to have in history a lot of fire towers. Most have been declining in efficiency or use. I don't see a budget in favor to allow the state to recommission those that are fixable or install new towers, nor a budget for staffing in the summertime and fall. So I don't want to see a Palisades, California company. That's what I'm saying. With an old forest, you're creating fuel on the forest floor. The dead, the diseased, the blowdowns, etc. You're not creating good wildlife habitat because of the occlusive crown that doesn't let any small brush type vegetation to grow. So you're limiting the amount of species of wildlife that's going to be there. There's no food for them, in other words. So I guess I would like to see this bill fleshed out.
I guess I would say I see it differently, that these are reference conditions, like be sort of 10% of the landscape is the goal of having an area that is left to its own devices, so that when we're making decisions and learning about the forests, particularly at a time of climate change, we can understand what nature does on its own, and then take those lessons and manage other forests differently based. Representative Pritchard.
On page 9, where it talks about future acquisitions of land, two different future acquisitions of parcels that adjoin any areas listed in section 2812 and below, upon acquisition of future parcels that do not adjoin or are not separated. In both cases, it says shall manage these areas as wildlands. So does that mean that automatically for a long-range plan, intensive management is off the table?
No. So those two sections have different words after shall manage wildlands. So in the first one, it's shall unless there's public comment and substantial evidence that they shouldn't. And the second is shall manage if doing so would not be consistent with the purpose. So in both cases, A&R needs to go through a review process for either type of land. If it's adjacent to existing ones, they need to go through a more formal process with a public hearing and review the evidence to determine if it should be a wildland. There's a sort of a more presumption that an adjacent parcel should be a wildland unless there's substantial evidence. In the second instance, when they're not adjoining, they don't have to if it would be inconsistent with the chapter. So it's two different types of review processes that they have to go through.
Okay, I think I understand that, but once that has happened, are those designations above, those management designations, no longer apply to those lands?
Yes, what the designation of wildlands does not involve intensive management.
Or what was the one below?
Is it sensitive?
It's here. Intensive.
Highly sensitive management.
Okay, just intensive management, I guess. I thought I saw there was another. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. So members, we have, shift gears. Back to solid waste now. With Matt Chapman joining us any minute now, but we can take a 5-minute break until he comes in. To tee up your questions on the bottle bill in this 5-minute break, because that's primarily what we're having Matt in on right now. So we walked through the bottle bill yesterday. We all had some, whatever, we had good conversations with Ledge Council, but a number of things were like, what does the NR think? So we're having Matt in. So that's what that.